Hi there, my name's Atticus and I'm building a new flashcard app called FlashNotes. If you're interested in following along with the journey, then subscribe for more weekly update videos like this one. This is episode 2, so if you haven't seen episode 1, definitely go back and watch that. In it, I explain exactly why I'm creating the app and show you what it can do so far. So at the start of the week, I sat down to do some coding and I first had a look at this long list of to-dos that I've got. So these are all specific things that I've got to do with FlashNotes that I'm planning to do in the future. But I couldn't decide which one would be best to do next. So since I've got this exam coming up, I thought I should probably just do some revision and think about coding later on in the week. So what I often do is pass questions on a website called PassMed, and doing the questions is really helpful because it's kind of simulating the exam environment. But after getting a question wrong, I always try and read through the kind of description it gives, and then often I'll make a flashcard to write down the key fact. And while writing these flashcards, I started to realise that I use hints for pretty much every flashcard I make. So that quickly got me onto the idea of implementing hints in FlashNotes. If you watched last week's episode, you'll remember that that was the only thing that kind of didn't format nicely when pasting in the Anki FlashNote. I briefly explained in the last video that hints are prompts displayed when testing yourself on cloze deletion flashcards. They're really helpful for several reasons. One is if you have a list of things to remember, you can provide some helpful prompts for each of them. Another use case is for mnemonics, which are commonplace in medicine and medical school. You can use them to display just the first letter of a word, allowing you to guess the rest of the word. And finally, they work quite well in all other cloze deletion scenarios, just to allow for continuing the flow of text. This is what I've got so far in FlashNotes. I'm not set on the style of it yet, but I think it works reasonably well. In terms of its functionality, it's still only really able to translate Anki style text into a visually appealing kind of form of hints. The next step will be adding a way to create your own hints from the highlighter interface. So at the moment, I think the best way to do this will be to have a small button pop up when hovering over highlighted text. Just a little plus button basically. And then you'll simply be able to click on that, text box will pop up and you can just quickly type a hint in and click enter. So that's basically everything I've done this week in terms of FlashNotes. It doesn't seem like much, but behind the scenes it took quite a lot of work. So the rest of the video I'm going to be going into a bit more detail on how I went about implementing hints, some of the challenges I faced. So initially I had to remind myself of the way that FlashNotes currently processes text. The raw text is processed into a structured object with extra data about each word. This is kind of like when luggage at an airport is checked in. Before checking it in, it's just this bit of luggage with nothing to identify it, which is the same as text on a page when you've just typed it. But after checking in, it's given this metadata in the form of a label. The label tells you how much it weighs, what flight it's meant for, etc. And that's kind of what happens with the text. So text with the kind of Anki tags and the hints is there on the page, but it's still just raw text. And it takes a bit of code to kind of siphon through the text and add that extra layer of metadata on top, so that the computer knows how to display the text that it's given. So it knows when there's a hint, it knows if text is selected, etc. And just in terms of when this code actually runs, it runs whenever the save button is clicked. So you type the text into the text box and then you click save, and then this is the code that's executed. This is an example of how the text is currently processed by FlashNotes. This isn't the exact code, but the structure of it is the same. So the first thing that happens is that the block of text written on FlashNotes is split every time there's a space into a separate item that's then put in a list. So a list or an array is just a kind of group of items that the computer can read. Then after this kind of splitting into these separate items happens, a bit of code is run for every item in that list. So this code is to kind of check and look at the item and see what it is. And to do this, something called an if-else statement is used. If both the start and the end tag are present, then it means that this must be a self-contained cloze deletion with only one word in it. If there's a start tag but no end tag, then it must be the first word in a cloze deletion, and the following words must be part of the cloze deletion as well, until you reach an end tag. So then this third part, if there is an end tag but there's no start tag, then it must be the last word in the cloze deletion. And then you know that the next word after that is either going to be the start of a news close or it's just going to be some normal text. And then you can see this else block here. So this code only runs if none of the above is true. And since all of the above checks for whether there are tags, this code will run if there's no tags in the text. And if this happens, there's two possible scenarios. One is that the text is normal, so it's just plain old text that's been written, it's not part of any closed deletion. And two is that the text is in the middle of a closed deletion. So text that's been split up by spaces, if you've got a whole sentence in a closed deletion, some of that text isn't going to have any tags in it, but it will still be part of the closed deletion. So we need a way of detecting that, and this is how it's done. So it checks whether the previous item in the list is selected, and if it is, then it will select the item it's currently on. I hope that made sense, and if you found it interesting, let me know in the comments, and I can definitely do more kind of coding explanations in the future. And all of this is just to produce what we already have. There's nothing new here, so this is just how FlashNote works for deciphering text at the moment. So then the question is, how on earth do I implement hints? So in terms of implementing hints, the first thing I had to look at was something called regular expressions. These are what I use to check for whether there's a start or an end tag in a piece of text. So I use these already, but I need to kind of make a new one of these expressions to be able to identify whenever there's a hint tag. So regular expressions, or regex, allow you to create a set of rules for selecting patterns in raw text. So making one for hints was actually quite difficult, because the kind of double colon that signifies a hint in Anki is also present in the start tag. So whenever trying to select for the double colon, it would also select the start tag, and it would result in a lot of problems and it just wouldn't work. And if you had a single word in the closed deletion and then a single word hint, technically FlashNotes would see that all as one word. So when it comes time to classify that word as either being selected and part of the close or selected and part of the hint, it wasn't able to do that because it would have to create two separate words, but it was only within one item of the list. So what I found is that I had to add a space after every double colon before analysing the text. So what this meant is that when the text was split up according to where there are spaces, you would never have the kind of hint double colon in the same piece of text as a start tag. So this meant that I could treat these items separately, and I could just look for the double colon after having looked for the start tag. So if there was no start tag, then I could check for a double colon. And if there was, then it meant that this was the text before a hint would start. Because we added that space after the double colon, it meant that the hint would follow wherever a double colon was found. So this worked really well, and with a bit more coding, I managed to get it working so that I could identify all of these hints. So from there, when I had this metadata, it was easy to then single out and style the hints differently to the rest of the selected text so that they'd appear as hints, and I have a lot more control over how the user can interact with them. So that's it. You can see how complex it gets at points for something so seemingly simple as flashcard hints. So in next week's video, I think what I'll probably be working on is that plus button that I described before, a way to add your own hints from the highlighter interface. So definitely stay tuned for that. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, subscribe and comment, and I'll see you in next week's video.